Hi everyone, and welcome to the Power of Palo Alto Firewalls webinar with Keith Barker. We're excited to have you with us and hope today's session is informative. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. We'd like to remind you that the chat pod is available to ask any questions during the webinar. And following the presentation, Keith will do his best to answer a selection of questions asked today. Additionally, we will be posting a recording of this event to our blog, blog.cbtnuggets.com, in the next day in case you wish to review it again or are unable to join us live. With that, let's get to the main event. Take it away, Keith.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. And for everybody who's joining us from whatever time zone or location that you happen to be in, I want to take a moment and just thank you for joining us for this webinar. Personally, I love what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I create training content, and I do it in a manner just like this webinar that I'm presenting it as if I'm talking directly to you, as I'm talking directly to you right now. And one of the challenges in doing that is that in my recording studio that I work out of in my home, I don't have a lot of real interaction, right? I know that there's going to be individuals listening to it and enjoying the content, and that's great. But in a live webinar like this one that we're in right now, unless you're listening to this recorded later, it's fantastic to have this time with you, to talk with you about something I'm pretty passionate about, and that is the Palo Alto Firewall. So let's start off with a couple of basics. I'd like you to think to yourself, what are the chances that there will be some type of a compromise or an attack against the network at a company that you either work at or a company you work with? What are the chances that an attack or a compromise could happen? Now, as we think about that together, the reality is it is extremely likely. It's not a question of if the network is going to be attacked or compromised. It's really just a question of when. And so as far as firewalls go, there's really been an evolution over the last, I'm going to say decade, with what a firewall is supposed to be able to do. And a lot of vendors, and okay, let's talk about vendors for a moment. We've got Cisco is out there, they make a firewall. We've got Palo Alto, they make a really good firewall. We've got Checkpoint, in my opinion, who also makes a really good firewall. We have Juniper that makes a pretty good firewall as well. But here's the crux. With these new flavors of firewalls that are coming out, what are they supposed to be able to do? What could we expect from a firewall? Now, I'll tell you what we cannot expect. We cannot expect to just plug in some device, close our eyes, and just hope it keeps us safe, because that is not a security solution. That is a prayer that is not going to be answered by a single device that you just plug in. Anytime we're dealing with security, there's a large environment that we're dealing with. We have security in our development of our applications. We have security in our user policies and what users are allowed to do and how they handle emails and so forth. We have security policies with what traffic that is allowed through the network and so forth. So one of the benefits of a next generation firewall, and that's what all the vendors are calling their unified threat management systems. One of the benefits of a unified threat management type system is the ability, let me go ahead and get my pointer out here, there it is to have some basic abilities to do, and let's start with stateful filtering. Let me see if I can write this up, state. And hopefully this is showing up for everybody. If it's not, I'm just writing the word stateful. Stateful filtering is the idea about remembering. I will remember you. That's a terrible rendition of a song. I don't even know. So remembering is like having a user like Bob. So here's Bob on the inside of his network or on some subnet on the inside of the network. Bob wants to go out to the Internet. So what Bob does is he sends traffic out to the Internet. And behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff going on. For example, there's domain name system, resolving a name like cbtnuggets.com to one or more IP addresses. There's an initial TCP three-way handshake for TCP-based services. There's request and HTML and all different kinds of languages that are being used for that connection. So with a typical stateful firewall, the request as it goes out, the firewall remembers the details of Bob's session. So I'll say Bob's right here. So it remembers the details. It knows about the source IP address. It knows the destination IP address. It knows the source ports for TCP and UDP at layer 4. It knows the applications, and it tracks the basic details of a session. And the reason for that is because the return traffic, when it comes back in from the server back to Bob, the firewall, if it's stateful, is going to remember that, oh, Bob made this request. This reply is exactly the correct pieces, the correct IP addresses involved, the correct TCP ports or UDP ports at layer 4, and it dynamically allows the reply traffic to come back in because it's a stateful firewall. Now, the benefit of doing that is we can have a policy that says to the Internet, no, meaning no traffic's allowed in through the firewall unless it's explicitly allowed or it's a reply that's coming back from a session that Bob initiated, and that's due to the stateful nature. So stateful firewalls have been around for decades, a long time, and every firewall worth its salt has that basic functionality of being a stateful firewall. That's really not a big deal. Like a couple decades ago, it was a big deal. I think, in fact, Checkpoint was one of the initial vendors that actually developed stateful firewall technologies, and then everybody has used it past that point. So in addition to stateful filtering, the other attacks and things that can happen on our network are pretty severe. And they would include this. For example, let's say that Bob, and I'll go ahead and write Bob's name again here for a moment. So we have Bob. Oh, let me get my pen out. There it is. So let's say that Bob is going out to, let's take a website that everybody's used. At least I think everybody's used. It's called Facebook. Zuckerberg said sometime last year that there was over 1 billion unique users on Facebook in one 24-hour period. That is like 1/8 of the population of the world using Facebook. So it's pretty popular. But maybe we don't want Bob to be able to use everything on Facebook. Maybe we want Bob to be able to post articles on Facebook or to read information on Facebook, but maybe we don't want to allow chat, or maybe we don't want to allow file transfer, or maybe we don't want to allow games or so forth on Facebook. And one of the benefits of a next generation firewall, and again, a lot of the different vendors have the ability to implement these features, but the concept is we can use something called App ID. And App ID is the ability for the firewall to identify what the actual application is. Now, when you think, well, what do you mean, Keith? Like Word for Windows, or what do you mean by application? I'm talking about a specific app or service that the user is trying to get. So let's say we set up a policy, and as part of our policy we say Facebook is okay, generally speaking, or Google is okay, generally speaking, or SSL services are okay, generally speaking, but we can then go ahead and limit that further by saying chat on Facebook is not allowed, or Google Drive as part of Google services is not okay. And a next generation firewall, I'm talking specifically now about the Palo Alto Firewall, has the ability, if it's appropriately licensed, to go ahead and do very granular analysis of exactly what that user is trying to do, the application, so it can enforce your policy. Most companies, if they're not using a firewall that can do that, don't have that control. They could block Facebook altogether, perhaps, with URL filtering generally, but they wouldn't have the ability to go ahead and block individual applications within Facebook. And that becomes very important as we start locking down policies and making sure our users are complying with our policy. Because there's a lot of risk out there, and we want to reduce that risk by enforcing policy and having intelligent devices that can do it. Now another challenge is this. I'm going to go ahead and put it right here. SSL. Now SSL, Secure Sockets Layer, which behind the scenes may be implemented by SSL or TLS, is encrypted services between Bob and a server. So if Bob is going out to Facebook and he's using SSL, the problem is that, well, it's actually a benefit and a curse. The problem is that Bob, if he's using SSL, has a secure encrypted session between his computer over here on the left and the series of servers that are hosting the Facebook content. So if it's SSL and it's encrypted, a firewall like this Palo Alto that we're looking at the details for in the middle, it can't tell the details of the payload if that content's encrypted. So one of the huge benefits is that we can train and configure our network so that the Palo Alto Firewall can actually act as a man in the middle in a positive way and do SSL decryption. So Bob's session is really between the Palo Alto Firewall and Bob's computer, It's decrypted at that point. The policies can be analyzed, and then the Palo Alto Firewall, acting as a proxy, can go ahead and forward a request on its own out to the actual server. And that way it has a chance of identifying just on the Palo Alto Firewall itself what the actual content is. So that's referred to as SSL decryption. And it's a huge feature, and it's important because if you don't have that functionality, the Palo Alto Firewall cannot look at the details of the content and the payload and make decisions based on application ID if it can't. Because if it can't analyze those, if it can't see the application because of encryption, it can't do the app ID fully. Another huge benefit of having a next generation firewall like a Palo Alto, which by the way is my favorite. I don't care who knows, because if I had a customer and they were looking at budgets also matter, right? There's price points and various, what does it cost a year for the licensing and so forth and support. But at the end of the day, if I had a customer that really cared about enforcing a solid security policy, and they wanted a system that really worked well and was fairly easy to implement, I would absolutely reach out and recommend Palo Alto as one of my first choices. And my other up there in that same ranking would be Check Point. Those are both two absolutely fantastic security-focused companies that make great products. Okay, and Cisco makes a product, and Juniper makes a product, and Sophos makes products, and there's other companies out there. But I'm just telling you that based on my experience and what I've deployed and what I've worked with and what I've seen and what Gartner says, et cetera, that Check Point and Palo Alto are two of my favorites. Okay, so the other thing we want to do with a next generation firewall is have the ability for user identification for our policies. And let me go ahead and just for a moment, let me go back to the slide with Bob. So let's imagine that we have this user, Bob, and with Bob, here we go. And with, let's say Bob is a member of Human Resources. Well, if we want to allow certain access, let's say we do want to allow certain Google services like Google Drive and so forth for people who are members of Human Resources, we could set up a policy that says if you're a member of Human Resources, then Google services, including Google Drive or whatever it is you want to allow as an application, can be allowed. Now, the tricky part is this Palo Alto Firewall, it needs to know who the heck Bob is. And so with the Palo Alto Firewall, there's integration with, for example, the most popular directory service in most corporate America environments, and that is Active Directory. Do you know why Microsoft isn't fat? It's because it's active. Now, Active Directory is a database of users that most corporate America customers are using. And so we can integrate with Active Directory. Let's say this is our AD server right here. And we can have the Palo Alto with an agent that runs on the box itself integrate with Active Directory. So it can look at security logs, and it can actually see what are the IP addresses associated with which users, and then it can, based on that, it can know who those users are, and it can have those users associated with various groups. Also could be done as part of Active Directory. And then as a result, we can set up our policy that Bob can go out to Google Drive, he can go ahead and do file transfers and whatnot because we know who Bob is. There's also options if you're not using Active Directory or you have a Mac that's not part of Active Directory. There's other options which include Captive Portal, where Bob, when he goes out initially, if the Palo Alto Firewall doesn't know who he is, can stop him and say, I need to know who you are. Who are you? Captive Portal. It's going to figure that out. So basically, Bob is prompted at a browser-looking window to authenticate. He puts in username, password, authenticates, and then now the Palo Alto Firewall knows exactly who Bob is based on his IP address. And that's really important if we're going to enforce policy. And this is also critical. It's also important if we go back and we want to find out what the heck happened. You know, if there's a security breach or if there's violations, we can go back and we can not only identify this packet from 10.5.5.17 was trying to go here or trying to go there or trying to download malicious content. We can also associate that with the user because it's right there in the logs, which is really, really cool, really important to have. And one other benefit I want to talk about, and then we'll talk to some about certification and other details that you may be interested in as well as is Content ID. Content ID has many different facets, but the basics of it is that with Content ID, we can go ahead and analyze the content that our users are trying to either download from the Internet or send up through the Internet. For example, PDFs. What could be wrong with a PDF? Well, plenty. It could have malicious code embedded in a PDF. The user launches it, and now they've got malware on their computer. Easy peasy. It happens all the time. A user may go to a website that is known, for example, for issues or problems or bad content. And in addition to URL filtering, which is a whole other option that we have here, we can also identify the content that they're trying to download, analyze it, put it in a sandbox if necessary, make sure we know what it is, and then if it's malicious, we can prevent it from ever making it to the user's computer. Very, very cool stuff. And the other thing I love about the Palo Alto is that there's huge integration with the big puffy thing. Keith, what is the big puffy thing? And I'm talking about cloud-based services. So because all these Palo Alto firewalls can participate and provide information about, for example, unknown applications that are showing up or executable files that are showing up that users are trying to download, with services like Wildfire, that information can be analyzed, it can be collated, and then updated dynamically to all the firewalls. So somebody in China who is attacking some site in another part of the world, I didn't mean to pick on China, let's pick on Kazakhstan. Somebody in Kazakhstan who's attacking some other part of the world and there's malicious content coming from a certain site, that information can go ahead and be made aware to the cloud by analyzing that traffic, what's going on, and then that information can be sent down to our individual firewalls to help us protect against those new types of attacks. So we still have day zero possibilities, but we have a lot more protection against day zero with a firewall that is willing to take new apps or new content that it hasn't known about, there's no signature for it, and have it analyzed. And then we can look for malicious traits. Like is it making calls that it shouldn't have, or is it doing behaviors that are similar to other types of malware, and it can be analyzed, we can stop that traffic, and we can also benefit by other firewalls also learning from that information based on the cloud services. So with a firewall, there's lots of bells and whistles going on, but in the course that we've created at CBT Nuggets, my goal, our goal at CBT Nuggets, was to assist you if you're interested in learning the Palo Alto Firewall, how it works, how to get it up and running, how to get it booted up, how to create policy, implement policy. We wanted to take usually the first 20 hours of learning some new skill, whether it's basketball, checkpoint, Palo Alto, Cisco, routing in general, security basics. The first 20 hours are usually quite the hardest. It's the learning curve. And what we want to do is make that as easy as possible to get you up and running as quickly as possible with the fundamentals of how the Palo Alto Firewall works and what it does and how it operates. So the course is a lot of fun. I think there's like over 45 different nuggets, individual sections, chunks, so you can pick and choose as you want to go through. The other cool thing is that if, let's say it's 6 months from now, and you went through the whole course, you enjoyed it, and 6 months from now you're thinking, oh, how did I do that integration with Active Directory again? You can just go back to that nugget, watch that one short nugget, say, oh yeah, it's coming back. I do that all the time, because I have the opportunity and I love doing it, of creating lots of content on various vendors, including Checkpoint and Palo Alto and Cisco and F5 and Citrix, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes I will forget like how something worked or how it's all linked together, and I go back to my own videos. It's like, okay, I did that a year and a half ago. Let me go back and like, oh yeah, it's all coming back to me right now. So they're a great resource. Some certifications that Palo Alto has for people who want to document a certain level of understanding. There's two exams that come to mind. One is called ACE, and that is the Accredited Configuration Engineer. And I want to tell you this. This exam is free. You take it online at Palo Alto. If you go to PaloAltoNetworks.com, there's links for it. And you take it online for free. It doesn't cost anything, and it's fairly lengthy. And here's the beauty of it. It will help you identify areas that maybe you need to study a little more in, areas that you hadn't considered, or areas that you need to get more hands-on practice with. And I think of this ACE exam as a warm-up for the PCNSE, which is the Palo Alto Networks Certified Network Security Engineer. Currently, as of this recording, they currently have PC NSE 6. Even though 7.x, the code has been released, it's not until we get to 7.1 where they actually flip the switch and say, okay, now we're going to be testing on PC NSE 7. So my first certification with Palo Alto was with version 4. And their products are very similar. Like for example, the difference between 6 and 7 from a user or from an administration perspective, very, very similar. And so what I did in the course is I actually included 6 and 7. So as we work with the interface, I walk you through in one of the nuggets of how to do the upgrade to version 7. And what you'll notice is if you squint, it's like, wait a second, this version 6 looks incredibly like version 7 from an administration perspective. And the answer is yes. Yes, it does. So those are the two certifications that you can pursue if you want to document your basic knowledge and understanding of a Palo Alto firewall. So ACE is free. The PC NSE, you take that one at a View Testing Center and you sign up for it. You give them some money and then you take it. And yeah, so I just want to make you aware that those existed. As far as study guides for either the ACE or the PC NSE exam, they've got those up at the PaloAltoNetworks.com website. So you can download the study guides, see what the topics are, and become familiar with them. Here's the basic essence of what is going to be tested on for the PC NSE certification. And in our course, I didn't attempt to cover every possible feature and function and how a Palo Alto firewall works, because that would be a course that would be possibly weeks in length. So we created 45 or so plus nuggets to give you the head start on ramping up on understanding the concepts, the architecture, the design, how to get routing working, how to set up features, for example, such as network address translation, implementing security policy, how to integrate this with GNS3 in a lab environment if you choose to, setting up DMZ server access from the outside. If you have users on the internet who need to access a DMZ server, such as maybe it's an email server or a public web server, you need to set up security policies and network address translation for that to work. And there's a couple of flavors and ways of doing that. So we teach those in the course as well. There's also the ability to export your configurations and import them, licensing, upgrading, application ID, SSL outbound encryption, URL filtering, LDAP integration, creating VPNs, setting up Global Protect, so we have remote access VPN and site-to-site VPN. So there's a lot of ground that we cover in the course. And again, the goal is to get you up and running as quickly as possible with the foundation components of the Palo Alto Firewall, which you already know I love, so I don't have to tell you that anymore. One of the biggest things that I think is helpful is if you can build a lab. Now, when I say a home lab, it doesn't have to be at your home. If you have a company that you're working with and you want to build a lab with physical gear, that's great. Or if you want to use virtualized appliances, that's great too. There is licensing that is required. So for example, if you don't have a license for an advanced feature like URL filtering and so forth, those features are not going to work. So so just as a heads up, you can set up some basic, like the first 10 or so nuggets in the course are all done without applying a license. And the reason I did that is because I realized that not everybody is going to have access to the advanced license features. So the first 10 or so nuggets can all be done if you have the images for the Palo Alto Firewall in a virtualized environment to build your home lab. And then the advanced features, if you don't have license for that, you can watch the nuggets. And the actual process of adding the advanced features and enabling them, setting them up like zone protection and so forth, URL filtering, app ID, user ID, those are fairly straightforward. My goal is to help you get as up and running as quickly as possible with those features. So as far as the strategy for learning, let's say, just for a moment, that you're brand new to IT and networking and security. And you say, well, how do I start? And here is a roadmap, and you can just kind of pick up where you are currently and continue. For someone who is fairly new, and this may be for someone that approaches you, let's imagine that tomorrow or next week, someone approaches you and says, you know what, I want to know more about your career. I want to know more about what you do. How would a person get into that career as far as the knowledge and skills that would lead me to that type of career? And here are some ideas that we could go ahead and tell them. CompTIA Network Plus is a basic, fundamental, entry-level playing field for how computer networks operate. It involves ports and servers and IP and all the basics of things that maybe you and I sometimes take for granted, but it's important for a new person to gather all that. So CompTIA Network Plus, a fantastic way for a new person who's new to networking to start. Then I usually recommend going into an entry level for Cisco. Do you know where a 5,000-pound gorilla sits when it's tired? Where does a 5,000-pound gorilla sit when it's tired? And the answer is anywhere it flipping wants to, because it's a 5,000-pound gorilla. Cisco is a 5,000-pound gorilla. They've got a huge market share for a lot of stuff in the internet space and networking space. And whether you love them or hate them or whatever, it does serve you, if you're working into the world of IT and networking specifically, to get the fundamental entry-level Cisco certifications under your belt, because those concepts can apply to other vendors as well. And then I would say CompTIA Security Plus would be the next place to go. That's a foundation, fundamental level for security. Secure DevOps, security for virtualized and physical environments, the basic concepts of firewalls, load balancers, and how they fit into all that from a security perspective, VPNs and so forth. And then if you're going down the security road, another one I would recommend looking at is called CCNA Security, which is Cisco specific again. But once again, the concepts regarding VPNs and implementing security, things like AAA and so forth, apply to the entire gamut. You know, Checkpoint, Palo Alto, Cisco, Juniper, they all have very similar functions and concepts, and it's just like a slightly different way of implementing them. And sometimes you might find a vendor where that feature doesn't exist, or you can't implement it the way that you'd like to. So CCNA Security, I would recommend it as part of the track. And then CCNP Routing and Switching is a professional level from Cisco. Again, same concepts regarding OSPF and advanced routing and so forth apply to multiple vendors. And then Palo Alto and or Checkpoint or possibly Juniper, depending on the environment that you're working in. That's the direction I would recommend going. So that's a quick zero to hero list of getting into and starting with. And one of the key elements is practice, practice, practice. Don't just watch a video or read something. Actually, whenever possible, do hands-on practice so you can actually verify. I learn more things by doing hands-on practice, and I figure out what the documentation, I maybe misunderstood it, or it didn't work the way I had it, or it was on a different version. But doing the hands-on practice is proof that the concepts you're learning are actually what are happening, and that's why it's so important. So I'm going to go ahead and take some questions here in just a moment. If you need to contact CBT Nuggets, we're at cbtnuggets.com. I've got some social media contacts up here as well. I've got a public Facebook page that you just have to like the group to join, and poof, you can post there and so forth. And I've got some videos on YouTube, and there's a thing called Twitter, which I think is taken off. So those are my main social media contacts if you'd like to contact me. And I am going to go ahead and take a few moments. We're at the tail end of our half hour, but I've got a few questions, and I'd like to go ahead and take them. I had a few from the queue from earlier. Let me just grab those real quick, and they are right here. Okay. 3 questions. These are from Facebook and LinkedIn. One of the questions was, how good is Palo Alto versus Checkpoint? And I think those are both fantastic products. So the price point and what features and functions you need from each of the vendors and what that's going to cost, those would be things to consider. But if you're using Checkpoint or Palo Alto, those are both great choices. And I won't mention I won't mention Cisco or Juniper as not great choices, but I would say that Palo Alto and Checkpoint are better choices than what Cisco. And that's, Cisco is making roads in. They've got Firesight and Firepower, and they're integrating those technologies as fast as they possibly can. But because Cisco is not a security company only, they make tons and tons of bells and whistles and ACI and everything else. Palo Alto and Check Point are focused. That's their heart and soul, is on security, security, security. And for that reason probably, and because they hire some screaming smart engineers and technicians, is probably why their products are, in my opinion, better for security. Okay, second question. Okay, actually I'm going to go to the live questions for a moment. And let me see if I can grab one more. Okay. Scott's asking, I love app filtering. We use it here. Does it catch those apps from the application layer of the OSI? So in the OSI reference model, it's just a model, right? It's layers 1 through 7. So in the TCP/IP protocol stack that we use, there's only 4. So we have the transport layer, and then above that is the application layer. So basically, application layer, which is application presentation session, the answer is yes. A Palo Alto firewall or any next generation firewall is able to look at the actual payload, the application that's being used, and then based on that application and specific sub-applications like Facebook or Facebook chat or Facebook file transfer and so forth, it can identify that and then filter or allow or deny that based on the type of application. So there's multiple layers. We have URL filtering in general. For example, we don't want people going to pornography sites or hate sites from corporate computers ever. And so we have that type of general filtering. And then beyond that, we also have the application filtering, which is actually looking at the payload and the content. All right, one more question, and then I'm going to turn back to Aaron. How beefy are these appliances? And the answer is they are as beefy as your pocketbook. So, for example, if we were going to deploy a Palo Alto firewall in a production environment and we are protecting computers, real computers, we wouldn't want to use a virtualized appliance for that. We'd want to buy a physical appliance that has dedicated processors that are built for the task, and then we'd buy the model to support the throughput that we are going to expect. And that's also involved, what are we analyzing? Are we doing app ID? Are we doing user ID? Are we doing SSL decryption? All those factor into what we're actually going to be doing. So the virtualized appliance for Palo Alto is great for a lab environment, fantastic for a lab environment. It's also fantastic if you're protecting the traffic between VMs in a virtualized environment. Let's say you're using VMware's vSphere, which is one of my favorites, for example, and we want to protect and analyze traffic between those VMs, for example, inside our infrastructure. That's when the virtual appliance just rocks. But for physical, like users going out to the real internet and so forth from real computers, we probably want a physical appliance, and they've got a large range of appliances with the King Kong multi-CPU, just can do everything all the way down to the little PA200, which is like the home unit, which is very limited as far as CPU capacity, but does a great job for like a small office, home office. So they've got a huge range there. All right. I'm going to turn this back to Aaron. For everybody who's joined us for this webinar, thank you for spending a few moments with me. I absolutely enjoyed talking with you. And here at CBT Nuggets, we have a passion for making the life of an IT professional, for helping you improve it by increasing your skills, making learning fun, and also making it affordable. So for all of our customers out there, if you're a current customer, we thank you for your business. And for everybody else, we're grateful that you've shared your time with us today. And we hope to see you and work with you and make your life better in IT in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Aaron. Take it away, Aaron.
Thanks, Keith. Great job today. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate your time. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks again. Bye.